Email came in that says, "Hey, Dr. Corey and Pam. So I was folding laundry, real sexy vibes, obviously, and listening to last week's episode. When you started talking about outsourcing your desire, I literally froze mid-sock and thought, oh no, I think that's me. I always thought I was being easygoing, like, sure, babe, just initiate whenever you want. And if the stars align and if I'm in the mood and the dog's not staring at us, then maybe we'll just see what happens. But now I'm realizing that maybe I'm just handing off the entire job of sexual energy to my spouse. Like, you take it from here, I'll just react accordingly. So basically, I guess I'm subcontracting my sex life. Could you dig into this outsourcing thing a bit more? Like, what does it actually look like to own your desire without turning into some kind of overly intense intimacy guru or a pressure ninja? How do you take responsibility for what you want without getting weird or awkward about it? Thanks for keeping it real. I'm slowly trying to stop dodging desire like it's a game of emotional dodgeball. But progress is progress, right? Signed, a recovering outsourcer. So here's where we're heading today.
Okay.
It's a continuation of last week's episode. And so we'll do the same thing where during the regular version, we'll talk through an answering of what does this look like and just go deeper, because it was an offhanded comment we made on far too often spouses seem to outsource their desire to the spouse. And that creates all kinds of pitfalls and struggles. And then we'll get deeper into it in the extended content, which is deeper, longer, and no ads. Subscribe at smr.fm/academy. We'll go into some of the specifics of what does it actually do? How do you do this? Well, if we owned our desire, what would be a better questions to ask myself? What would be a better challenges that we could bring to ourselves to really get a better picture of what I may or may not be doing that's helping or hurting my situation?
All right, let's dive in.
And so welcome to the show. And we can't wait to jump right in right after this. So based on the email that just came in, this is one of those aspects that seems so interesting to me, because if you think about it, we got to do high level first, and then we'll go a little bit deeper in this segment, babe. That everything around us will usually elicit a response in us. We are wired to be reactive and engaging to our surroundings.
Sure.
Right. There's a biological component to it. There's a nature we were designed that way.
Yeah. And reaction being in awe of the amazing sunrise or sunset, frustration with, I don't know, a neighbor or someone letting the dog poop in my yard and
there's
not picking it up.
There's negatives on what this will elicit in us, but we are wired this way. Mm-hmm. We interact with our society. Some of it came down to just baseline survival. Loud noises, I need to run, if you go way back into our ancestries. But that's changed in the sense of loud noises today's day and age typically I'm not in the same predatorial prey circumstances, although we can go a whole different way with that.
Sure, the body still has the reaction
yes,
because that's a natural thing, and there's still bad things that happen.
Right. And so when it comes down to our sexual desires, though, which is the basis of this show and last week's episode, that when we were talking about the interactions of how oftentimes it seems like I want my spouse to respond the right way for me to feel desired. Or the other side of that equation can be my spouse didn't approach me right to cultivate my desire.
Sure.
Right. That's kind of where we were last week. And so if you missed last week's episode, jump back and catch up with that and then pick back up here. But one way to think about this is there's a biological component with our hormones that can help or hurt our desire levels. Testosterone is the main thing in here as far as a hormone that typically is equated to libido.
Sure.
Right. So when you have higher levels of testosterone in your body, male and female alike, that can cultivate a higher libido.
Yeah.
There's also, though, a responsiveness to our surroundings that can cultivate a libido. So it's not just biology, because humans have the ability to freely choose to participate. Like as a mind, I act my way towards something and my body will come along.
Yes, I act that way. My body will come along but it just may not come along the same way when I'm 52 as it did when I was 22.
Absolutely. And sometimes I will act my way and my body won't catch up and come along. And that's what comes with the territory of being human.
Yeah, we're not diving necessarily into that part though, right?
Right. So one way to
Not
think
today.
about, well, no, but one way to think about this is just as a baseline understanding, human sexual desire is more multifaceted than just biology.
Yes.
Right. And
Yes.
so that's the thought
okay.
of, I want to at least get that as a foundation, because we can choose, we can freely choose to participate in some things and our bodies catch up. We act our way towards something. I think that's a human condition. And, we feel about a certain thing. Well, I can act my way and my feelings will get aligned with that with that action.
Okay.
Right. But it's the same kind of concept when we're talking about the stimulations around us, though, that what can be helpful with a framework, just as a little addendum in this conversation, is thinking of it as accelerators and brakes, right? Because that's the conversations we've used before in the past.
Absolutely.
Where there are some things that accelerate our sexual interest and desires, and then there are things that break them. So just like a car, there's an accelerator which speeds it up and brakes which slows or stops everything. And so based on the conversation last week, when I put too much onus on you to respond to my advances a certain way, and if you don't, it's a break for me.
Sure.
If you respond in a way I'm hoping or intending or expecting, it can be an accelerator to me. And so one of the things to realize how I'm outsourcing possibly is, where am I putting too much pressure on external things? And they are accelerators or brakes, because this is where I can restory some things.
Okay.
Right. If I make a move as a higher desire spouse towards you, and you don't respond in the way I was hoping or intending or you had in the past, I can restory that on, it wasn't that I'm not desirable still. It was that it was bad timing. It was there was too many distractions, or there were other circumstances. Because where I want to land with this on how we are outsourcing this is, it's all about my own presence and engagement with myself as I'm bringing myself forward, and also then being attuned to what's going on around me, because it's not being blind to it.
Okay.
Right?
I mean, in that situation, you're saying, let me make sure I understand. I come in tune and I want to go after something, but to your reference last week, I think it was, maybe I don't need to do that at Target when we're shopping, right? Not being blind to my surroundings or to the feelings that something my spouse is actually dealing with.
Right. That's the bigger issue.
We're at home and my spouse is dealing with something, and there's no way that this is a good time for them. Is that what you're referring to?
Right. So it's restoring the fact that, because what happens, where the biggest pitfall of outsourcing this is, I give all of the identity and character to the person I'm outsourcing it towards. I'm giving over too much to them for my own well-being or propping up or value or identity, if you will. That if I'm contingent on how you respond, on how I define me, that's other validated. That's borrowed functioning, if we go even on a far, far extreme. I'm talking about it as, I need to just dial this back to realize, no, I can still bring myself forward with my desires and cultivating those, or just channeling those. Because this is one of the things we've also said in the past, that 100% of my sexual desires are not going to come just from you. They will come from a lot of sources in our world. The instigating of things, the arousal of things, the intrigue of things, whatever, because we all have nuances. And some of this is biology. So I'm not talking about anything illicit here. I'm just talking about, you see something and you get a little turned on. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. That's just the body doing what the body does. Where I steer that is what matters.
Yeah. Don't spend your time focusing on that thing that just happened to.
Right.
Yeah.
But those things can trigger something. And then the goal then as a human is, I can restory that and steer that another way
towards my spouse,
which that's where I think it starts to become the sacredness and the covenant of what married life and married sex is.
Yeah. Yeah. We could go down a rabbit hole with that
We
one.
totally
But I
could.
hear what you're saying.
But I want to at least let that be a foundation. And then you need to start looking at what is it that I'm telling myself when I do steer these things to my spouse. Because if I'm the higher desire spouse and I'm steering this, then my outsourcing would look like it's more contingent on how you respond or don't, on how I feel, rather than, no, I'm really just getting better at expressing myself towards you and then adjusting and recognizing how you respond. But I'm not as contingent on how you respond. That's what I mean by the nuance here.
So when you're talking with clients, do you see this being more prevalent? And it may be a pointless question, but do you see this being more prevalent when you're talking about the initiation of, say, a sexual encounter? Or is this more prevalent during the act of sex? Like we're getting into it, and either me going further is dependent on you engaging, or I'm reading something into you. And so I can't get my head in the game. I'm the higher desire and I've initiated, but now I'm losing it. I'm losing my brain and my concentration into this because I'm reading into
So
what
you're
you
asking, is this more heavily weighted on the initiation component of it, or the levels of desire within the components of actual interacting of the whole sexual encounter?
are. Right.
Yes.
It's both.
Yes.
Evenly, probably.
Some
I'm
of
not
us
looking for a ratio, but
some of us put more weight on the fact that I just want to make sure this gets going, and then I'll just go to sleep, metaphorically speaking, and just go through the motions. And it's autopilot then on what we do next and how it unfolds next, because that's the way a lot of times regressed sex happens. Is I just follow a routine. And so it doesn't matter if my partner's engaging with me and responding well or not, because we're having sex, because we go brain dead, if you will. That happens. And that's talked about in my office a couple of different times in my memory right off the top.
yeah.
That you start explaining and just looking at your own experience, and you realize, wait a second, we are fairly well detached having sex with each other, which is an interesting picture, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. You're thinking of your own thing
Mm-hmm.
that gets you to an end result.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
I can see that.
there's this element, though, of just starting to re-examine, how am I possibly doing, like our recovering outsourcer email. She's asking, like, hold on a second. If it feels like I've always been, I mean, it sounds like she's had some value and identity based on, I'm an easygoing girl. I'll go along with it. You get it rolling and I'm engaged. And so now she's questioning, am I really engaged? Which, that's the good question. Or am I just following your lead without my own presence being brought forth as much? Because I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I think we just need to be more conscious of it.
And when I'm conscious of it, if I'm just conscious of it, what good does that do?
It allows me to actually be more engaged in my own experiences, and then start to bring the sweetness of myself to these occasions, not just my body.
Okay. So it's not just being conscious of it. It's once I'm conscious of it, actually making that next move to actually do something about
Or
it.
asking the questions better of, what is it that makes it to where I'm okay just letting my spouse take the charge of this? What is it to where I'm okay with, it's, well, now they need to get done what they need to get done, or this is just for them, or I'm just along for the ride, and just asking yourself these questions of, are you really okay with that? Because freely chosen conscious desire is possible. And that's that idea of, I make a decision, I lean into something, and usually in time, my body comes along. I'll get back engaged. I'll do what's necessary, because I'll start addressing the roadblocks that I typically would have early on. Like, some couples have the ability, have this roadblock or a break of, I don't want to use lube, because that means there's something wrong with me. My body's not actually creating the lubrication it's supposed to. So no, I will only natural. And so when you reach this point where inevitably in life things can shift, and you're like, well,
My body's not creating
It's
the
not
loop.
as comfortable as it once was, but there's ways we can overcome this. Well, I have to re-script that
Yeah.
and embrace that. That's a growing of me.
Yeah.
And so it's really looking at it as, how do I look at my dynamic to see it as what I'm bringing forward, higher desire or lower desire, whichever one it is, how I'm present, how I'm engaged, and then what my spouse does with that, how they respond. Am I looking for them to actually encourage and validate me in these things, or acknowledge me in these things, or how am I just bringing myself forward to engage and then aware of how they are responding? Because this is where the continuum matters. Because sometimes we are secretly looking for validation or support or propping up because it's just a routine way we have always done life. Here's a quick detour to help, kind of just as a thought, to help confirm where people may or may not be with this whole conversation. When people get uncomfortable in situations, I'm talking about just public situations, like I'm feeling anxious about something, it is a very common reaction and response of us to crack a joke or be sarcastic to lighten the mood, because I don't like how I'm feeling in that moment and I want the tension break. That's a reaction.
Understood. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the same thing that's going on when I get into the deeper, more intimate moments of my life, where I haven't learned how to settle myself down. I just react. And it can be a shutdown, it can be a pushback, it can be a rejection, it can be a pouty, it can be an anger. It's the same exact thing. And so when I make a move, or my spouse makes a move toward me, and I base my reaction on, well, did they do it right? Did they respond right? Did they have the words right? Was it timing good? What, blah, 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 blah. My reactions of those are the exact same thing. And so that's what therein is where I need to work on. What's the story that goes on here? How much of the pressure have I put on my spouse to act a certain way, or to deal with something a certain way? Because a lot of times when I get into that kind of realization, I can honestly then get to this point where I realize, wait, I've done this. I'll own this. I have had moments, seasons of our marriage where I have I've fallen into the biggest trap there is in marriage, which is, I'll change when you change. I'll adjust when you adjust.
That, I think, wow, that is, I wasn't expecting you to go there today, because but I think that is a huge thing to realize if you're doing that.
Yeah.
Right? That is giant. Why wait for someone else to change? I mean,
Because
that's,
it feels safer.
well, it feels like a 12-year-old, right?
Yeah, but it still feels safer because it feels like it's less daunting for me to actually put myself out there. Then it's less daunting than my putting myself actually out there and it not being received well. So instead, it becomes this: well, when you go, I'll go. I mean, this is the proverbial higher desires, like de facto just giving up initiating because they're tired of it, of being rejected or not being responded, or the level of sex they're having, or whatever the rationale is.
Okay.
And so they quietly pull back, and it becomes this devil's pact of, I'll just hand over the controls to you. And so it's like, that's basically saying, I'll change, I'll have sex when you want to have it, which that creates such a quandary for both.
It does. It does. I'm just going back to that. I'll change when you change. You just got this circular reference, and nobody's ever going to change. It's just going to dive into a deeper hole.
Yeah.
And that just sounds scary to me.
Yeah, it is. And so then it becomes, and here's the questions to ask as we kind of we'll land the first part of the show, and then we'll move into the extended content. But so some questions to ask on, how do I take back control? Because if you think about it, well, a lot of what's happening is we're flying a plane together, and one of you is the pilot that's in charge, and the other's the co-pilot, but there's no throttle there that it has to be handed over to him. It's just for the metaphor we're using here. And so you think about it in the terms of, if I'm the one steering this thing and I'm the one that's usually more interested, then I need to ask myself a better question when it comes to my sexual desire specifically. And that is, am I clear about what I want, or am I looking for my spouse with expectations that I haven't even said out loud?
I'm
Because
sorry, I'm looking for my spouse.
I'm looking for responses from my spouse that I
Responses.
haven't said
Okay.
out loud. I have an expectation of my spouse that I haven't said out loud
Okay.
because I'm not clear of what I want.
Okay, so you're flying this plane together, but the co-pilot has no idea where you're supposed to be going.
And maybe they could help navigate, but you haven't even give them the vector of where you're trying to be
Right.
heading, where you're
You
supposed to
don't
be
even
pointing.
have it on autopilot already programmed for the
Right.
location.
Right. You maybe haven't even cleared it all with the air traffic. So we go all kinds of places with this metaphor. So if I'm the one steering the thing, I need to have in mind a little bit more of where I want it to go. And this is where it's sophisticated, because I believe in many, if not most, of the sexual encounters we have as couples, we switch roles of higher desire, lower desire within the moments. Someone is the higher desire that'll get it all started, but typically at some point in the midst of foreplay or engagement, or as the arc is going on, the lower desire could switch over to be the higher desire and say, no, I want to transition to this stage now. And it's usually maybe not spoken. It's
and
just
don't leave this spot because it feels amazing.
It's just a move, right? But that's the element of enough foreplay already. Let's move on to intercourse, or and so there's all these layers to it. So you can't just oversimplify it in, I am the higher desire completely 100%, 100% of the time in every action I have in my marriage when it comes to sex, because it's likely not completely true.
True. I would agree with that.
So asking yourself, okay, am I really clear? Do I know what I really want? And am I leading towards those? Because that's one of the aspects of being a better higher desire, and taking charge again of your own desire. And then if you're on the lower interested or the less interested desire,
responsive.
I don't like the word interested, actually, as I'm hearing it being said. If I'm the responsive desire, thank you. That's a better way to say it. Then what do I actually want with my sex life too?
Which goes back to the emails, what she's really looking for.
What do I actually want?
What do I want?
And I need to then compare that to, what does my spouse want? And how aligned or unaligned, or how much have I just given over control of and not embodied my own sexual desire and sexual actions and sexual interactions? Because we can do this real easy in life, where we just hand over the reins to something else and I just go along. I'm just there, right?
Yes, I'm good at that. I'm just thinking, oh gosh, there's so many aspects in my life that I'm like, you know what? I would love to be your right-hand man, but I don't want to make the decisions. I want to be here and be the workhorse. I want to help. I want to enjoy. I want to go right. I want to be part of this, but I really don't want to be the decision maker in it. I've got a lot of areas in my life I'm like that. And I think of how fun it is to be along on that journey, but the pressure of making the decisions. Some people thrive in the making the decisions department, and some people,
which is interesting,
maybe are scared of it. Maybe could thrive, but are just scared of it.
Well, but it also adds a different quandary that was actually a couple weeks ago on the platform at nation.s. Somebody asked, anybody else ever had decision fatigue?
Heck yes.
Right. Because then that's where the dilemma of life on life terms in a marriage, it plays out. And so it can be, yeah, they are the ones that are at charge of it, but it doesn't mean there isn't a burden from them if there's not better collaboration on both sides. Because even just the ability, let's end the first segment with this, on that idea of when you can have a tendency of, I love just the idea of going along with it. Okay. When you can be upfront about that and just say, hey, I just want to go along with this. I'm giving you the reins of all of it. At least then there's an expectation that's been delivered and an understanding of what we're both potentially can collaborate in, rather than you could do it unspokenly and just kind of routinely, because I just love kind of going along with it. And then when I look to you, hey, would you like to do this? You're like, oh, whatever. And then it's like, wait, hold on a second. I brought that to you because I'm curious and maybe I don't really want to make a call here. And so that's where we start to become tyranny, the lowest common denominator, and start spiraling. But I'm reminded of a time where we had a chance to do a date night, prompt to, because the kids were both going to be, they had plans that we weren't aware of that night. This was several years ago when both were still home. And you came home and said, well, what are we going to do? So, well, we're going to go to dinner. And you're like, right, it's really where? And I'm like, well, if I'm making the call, it's one of my 3 or 4 restaurants that I like. If you want something adventurous, you need to choose. And that was just a more proactive opportunity, I think, of it for both of us to be collaborative rather than what we could have had happen is you come home, where are we going? Well, we're going to go to one of the 4. And you're like, again, and why can't we blah, 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 rather than bring it, girl. What do you want? Lead with that too.
Yeah.
And there's the dilemma that happens that I think most of us don't even recognize.
Yeah.
And we for sure can do this in our sex lives because it's too exposing. It's too uncomfortable. It's too vulnerable. It's too risky. It feels guilty. It feels selfish, whatever. And so therefore, no, I'll just go along, or I'll just blindly lead this. Or I'll just do what we've always done. Or even as the hires are, I could be, well, I'll just set the stage like normal, rather than what I would really love to do. And well, how do I ask myself better questions to truly challenge myself of how am I possibly outsourcing a lot of things in my life? And if you ask yourself that question this week, particularly with my sex life, but anything, how am I outsourcing my well-being, my joy, my laughter, my engagement with things? Because it's the Hawthorne effect. You change something when you start trying to observe it. And so if you start looking and being curious, I'm going to be willing to bet you will see some things that now then you can use to change and lean into. And if you want to know specifically how to lean into these things, you're going to want to join us in the Extended.